Like what we said in our previous video when we talk about gamepads, certain games are meant to be played with a controller like this. So today what we have here is the Rapu V600s, and this gamepad is kind of unexpectedly good. So yeah, let me tell you why. Firstly, this controller is very reminiscent of the original Xbox 360's controller design layout, but Rapu also added some flair into it. Like for example, you got these rubber side grips around these two grips here, and then there's also this kind of indents so that your fingers can sit in between all of these grooves here to have a much better grip, and the controller won't slip around if you ever get sweaty, which is really good. But Rapu also inherits some of the flaws of the original Xbox 360 design. For example, the triggers here is kind of sharp around the edges, and for this particular controller, it's also kind of stiff. And the controller buttons here and the colors are also more or less the same. They feel good, so there's no complaints there. The thumbsticks is indented inwards, so it also grips onto your fingertips really well. And as you can see around the center here, there are a lot of extra buttons other than just the usual back and start button. So what we have here is turbo. So this is for you to repeat your actions like what we've seen on many other aftermarket gamepads. And then there's also another vibration button. This is not for you to select your vibration level, but just to toggle it on and off, which is kind of a bummer. And then there's also an XDA button. No, this is not XDA developers, but actually just to change between X input, D input, which is just to mean that it's meant for Windows compatibility settings, and then the last one, A, is for Android. But for me, I would just use it as an Xbox controller in X input mode, because this controller came along with this dongle. It does not support Bluetooth, and if you ever want to game wirelessly, you will need this dongle. Unfortunately, there's no place to even store this dongle in the controller. So if you ever lose this, you're f***ed. And if you guys want to use this gamepad for fighting games, this is not clicky, but you can roll your actions pretty okay. So I think it's good enough if you want to play fighting games using this controller right here. So what we have to do now is just to connect the dongle to the PC, which we have already done. And the first problem that we discover is the receiver strength. So make sure there's minimal obstruction between the controller and also the receiver. And once you've done that, just hold this Rapu button and then we'll turn on. It'll also turn on Xbox, whatever thing that is. And now we'll just hop into Super Meat Boy, because this is a game that I played a lot and the controller refused to work. Okay, so Super Meat Boy had some issues, so now we are jumping into another 3D platformer game which I have played for 3 times at this time. This is Ahead in Time, which is a 3D platformer game. Kinda relaxing but also real fun. And this controller here is, like I mentioned earlier, very reminiscent of the Xbox 360 layout. It's very good in terms of grip, though it kinda depends on if you like the Xbox One or the Xbox 360 layout, because I do know some people will kind of prefer Xbox 360 layout in terms of its grip compared to the Xbox One, and I can't get up. I think this controller, the buttons are real responsive, they are good to press, and the joystick is, most importantly, the indentation means that my finger wouldn't slip off as compared to, let's just say, the Xbox controller, because I really don't like how the joystick is shaped. And overall latency, even though it's wireless, once it gets the connection that it's supposed to get, then latency wise is not an issue, because I can still play the game perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. And yeah, Ahead in Time works fine. But one thing to take note of is, of course, like what we mentioned earlier, the connection strength is not good. So please make sure that you are getting good connection before you even start to game, because what issue we had just now was kind of weird. And now another problem that I have is, like when we tested Super Meat Boy earlier, it doesn't work with gamepad. Once I entered the world selection menu, it just stops working. I don't know why. But even in Ahead in Time, this game here, you can see that the button prompts, it doesn't change. It's still showing as keyboard and mouse. Not too sure what's happening because when I use an Xbox controller while playing this game, it switches very rapidly between keyboard and mouse, whatever input I put in. So yeah, I'm already using X input method, so which also leads us to a very good next point, which is the functionality of this controller here. In terms of functions, I would say it's pretty basic. Turbo mode is there if you want to use it, but if you ever want to use this controller with other devices, maybe let's just say if you want to use it with Nintendo Switch, it doesn't work. Or if you just want to use it with Raspberry Pi, I think it should work because it has an Android method in it. Other than that, it's kind of basic in terms of functions, but if you want to compare it with something that's similarly priced, like the Ghoulie Kid King Kong Pro, even the NS08, the non-Pro version, it has a lot more functions compared to this controller, but the build quality on the Ghoulie Kid isn't that good. But in terms of functions, it's way better compared to this one. Do I recommend you to get the Rapu V600s? It kind of depends on what you want to do with this controller right here. Firstly, if you just want to play PC games with this controller right here, it's good. But if you want to use multiple different consoles or platforms to play games, then maybe not. And if you want something like a macro recording feature or more advanced turbo modes, vibration selection, then yeah, this controller is just not really for you. But if you do like the Xbox 360 layout, this is a good controller. It kind of improves on it, and for the price you're paying for this controller, it's impressively low price. So that's all we have to say about this controller right here. This is the Rapu V600s. And if you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section below. We'll see you in the next video.